everybody this morning? We're going to be in Genesis chapter 31 this morning. Genesis chapter 31, lesson 137. So before we get started in that, let's go ahead and jump into our questions and make sure I'm online here. They can hear me. I believe so. Yeah, here we go. All right. Well, thanks. A little quicker right here. I guess I can turn it on. All right. All right, so we jump into our first question. Deals, so we'll be in Jacob, in Genesis 31, not Jacob 31, where everyone knows. So go back to Jesus, Matthew 24, 1 to 28. The question, yes or no? Jesus said that others would come claiming to be Christ before the destruction of Jerusalem. Yes, definitely. How should the disciples react to it? Not to believe it. He said very clear, don't believe in what they say. Next one, Jesus said that the gospel would be preached in A, Q, B, most, or C, all nations before the destruction of Jerusalem. All nations, exactly right. That would be nations of the Mediterranean area. We know the Mediterranean world at that time. Going to the next one, Exodus 5. Why did Moses and Aaron tell Pharaoh that he should let God's people leave?
They should go and hold it. They should let them go and they would hold a feast for him in the wilderness.
They would let him go and hold the feast in the wilderness. And the reason to go was to do that because God had told them to go do so. Exactly right. What did Pharaoh say about the Lord? He said, he said he didn't believe what they were saying because he said, I don't know your Lord. I don't know who he is and what he's about. I don't know anything about him at all. So it's like, okay, so that thinks that's enough. I guess so. But so let's move on to the next one. To whom did Isaac give the blessing? He gave it to Jacob. What was Isaac's reaction when he realized he had been tricked? He said he trembled with fear. Exactly. He was scared. I mean, he was scared when we look at the two different things, like scared because he didn't do what he wanted to do, or was he scared more of Esau, as he's an older age, everything the way that we find there. Which brings us now to our next question. What did Esau do when he learned that his Canaanite wives were displeasing to his father Isaac? He went and got wives from where? Anybody remember? It had been Abraham. You go all the way back in time after Ishmael. Ishmael's we see exactly right. Abraham's son, we would say Ishmael, and that's where he went to go find him at. How much did Jacob vow to give to God? Genesis 28, 22. A tenth. He said to give a tenth of everything that he has, which he had quite a bit, as we're going to find out in a little bit today. When first seeing Rachel, the daughter of Laban, what did Jacob do? Genesis 29:10. Did something for the camels. What? Well, he didn't sing his. That was the other. That was his dad. So the next one. What do we see him do? He moved the rock. He rolled the big boulder. It says from the top of the well to feed, to water the animals. Or my computer went off. To water the animals and the camels. That's where you're exactly right. What did Jacob first request that his wages be from Laban? Rachel. He said, give me Rachel as my wife, and I'll work for you for those 7 years that you want. And of course, we know that Laban cheated him out of that. He got her, but it was very deceitful the way it was done. The name of Rachel's first son was who? Very familiar. Joseph, exactly right. Genesis 30:24. What did Jacob ask Laban for wages so he could take care of his family? Yeah, exactly. Spotted, speckled lambs, we would say sheep and so on. And then, of course, brown goats. And we see basically anything that would not look right. Basically, that wasn't found right. And we see that happening. Who took care of Jacob's flocks when he sent them? He sent them about 3 days' journey away. His sons, exactly right. His sons took care of him. And where was that at? Why you said it? 3 hours away. What we see is what it tells us. What was that? It's look at it real quick. I can't remember off the top of my head. I know it was 3 hours away where he sent it to. I don't know if he gave actually the name. 30, 35, 36. All right. It would be 3 days. 3 days journey. That's all it says. Yeah, I didn't think he gave a name for it. So that place there was 3 days journey. We don't know exactly where. We get an idea. It would have been south because that's the direction we would want to go when he went home. Which brings us to now to Jacob, the full story. So we're going to look at here, we're going to do what we said, Jacob leaves Mesopotamia for Canaan. He's actually going to leave in chapter 31. He's going to start his life really with his family. And as we find here, So we're going to learn that Jacob flees from Laban in the first 21 verses. So let's go ahead and begin in verses 1 and 2. Someone go ahead and read that for us, please.
Now Jacob heard the words of Laban's son, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has acquired all his wealth. And Jacob saw the countenance of Laban, and indeed it was not favorable toward him as before.
Thank you. So both Laban and his sons, they were unhappy about Jacob's success. We've already talked about, I say unhappy, what do I mean by that? Laban was happy that he got a lot out of it, from that, but when he saw what's going on here, he wasn't happy with the success. They're very envious of what they found, what they saw with Jacob. Essentially, Laban's sons were accusing Jacob of stealing their inheritance. Either Laban hadn't told them the agreement between their dad and Jacob, or else they just didn't care. And they looked at it as their inheritance regardless. Bill, go ahead.
Follow this under nothing new under the sun.
That's exactly right. It's always like that. We see it.
Envy, greed, and jealousy.
Yep. And that's how, that's what we see in this, especially we find Laban's a very worldly man. We talked about that last week on Wednesday, and we're seeing it here. So, their perspective, it was disappearing their inheritance right before their eyes. Everything was just leaving them. And as a result, they became envious, we said, bitter towards Jacob. Laban also treated Jacob differently, which is interesting. Now, when we look at this, we think about moving 3 hours away, and we think it doesn't sound like a lot of time passes. Actually, he does this for 6 years. So in 6 years, as he's separating them and making this done during this moment, this time here, we see. Remember, Laban was willing 6 years earlier when it all started to pay the price to have Jacob stay and care for his flocks. But now Laban's attitude was quickly changing of what was happening here. God's blessings upon a believer, as we understand, one that looks to God, looks to Christ, and one that's following them, can elicit one of the responses those around them. Usually it's either hunger for God, or it's basically, they become very ungodly, envious, and sad at what they're seeing. And, they don't want someone to have what they do. So sadly, when a Christian experiences blessings, it is often common for others to become envious of those blessings that we see. I'll get you on in just a moment. So as we look at that. So I'll start with Doug and go over to Bill. Doug, go ahead.
I don't mean to get ahead of you, but Jacob also set up things as he was taking care of the sheep and the goats so that they would breed when they went to he had it fixed up where when they bred, the lambs would all be speckled or brown. And so most of his, while he was there taking care of the flocks, most of the lambs and all the little ones that were being born, they were going to go to Jacob because they were speckled in brown. So instead of Laban actually making, a profit off of the white sheep, there weren't going to be any white sheep hardly at all. So, it was working out where it was much, God made it where it was much better for Jacob than it was going to be for Laban. But Laban was still worshiping idols.
Oh, definitely, without a doubt. A very pagan man. We'll see it actually more today. And exactly right. In fact, in chapter 31, it's going to tell us that God was the one that made this happen. Remember what Jacob did, his part, was when he had to come to water, he gave them those different types of reeds, different types of things, and what it did, it made them very fertile, made them go into heat a lot faster. And that would produce, and it was producing nothing for Laban, as Doug just said, it was all for Jacob. And we're going to find that God is the one that actually, of course, without a doubt, made this happen for Jacob, and just the blessings that are there for him. Bill, go ahead.
This is only tangentially related, but when Howard Carter was looking for Pharaoh's tomb, he spent years and years and decades of money and effort and energy in the cold and the dry desert of Egypt. Nobody cared until he found Tutankhamun's treasure. And then everybody got real interested. Jacob labored and worked and built and did. And when did they get interested?
Yeah, when everything was there, it's exactly right.
Yeah.
Boom, here's all the money.
What a success Jacob's been.
Yeah,
It's time for us to be envious, jealous, and greedy about it.
Exactly, as we find that there. So when we look at this, when a family, you think about this, when a family member is blessed by God, we talk about these blessings we see here. Sometimes when a family member is blessed by God, and other members maybe aren't following God, they can become envious. They can become critical of that family member. And as we see this, and it shouldn't be the case, but we know it's going to be the case, because even Paul reminds us of this in Romans chapter 12, verse 15, what we're supposed to be doing when we have family members that receive that, or whichever may be, sad, sorrow, or happy, of course. And he says, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. I mean, think about this for a moment. Paul tells us, rejoice with those who rejoice. We should always seek to celebrate the success of others, as we have seen through this study that is nowhere to be found in Laban and his sons. Nowhere do they do that. Do they act like that way whatsoever? And as we learn to do this, God is pleased, and as we remain spiritually intact with him in the way that we should. So Genesis 31:3. Let's jump to that verse here. Someone go read that for us, please.
Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your family, and I will be with you.
Okay, so here, this is very important to understand. Remember, when we look what we've read so far, remember the last recorded revelation, doesn't mean God didn't talk to Jacob somewhere else in this time period, but we have nothing recorded that God talked to Jacob for 20 years, that there was no voice there whatsoever we see to him. There may have been, but there's nothing written down, is what I'm getting at. So while we're still in the land promise situation, is where that's moving towards in this moment. But now Jacob receives divine directive to return. He says, I want you to return. Remember, God had him find where he was at. And remember what he's doing is molding them, changing him, making him very humble in his ways. And we see that. And so he's directed and assured by God, and that he would get there, basically. For God to say return there, that's basically God saying, you're going to get there. I'm going to get you there. And it's very impressive to see this revelation come about. And yet we'll just remember that there was a 20-year gap from when he started to where he is today, coming back home. Now remember, his mom thought it would only be for a few days, is what she said. And she's gone. We know that, the whole family. We see how this will work out. So although many of the events we read about in the Old Testament are captivating, miraculous, and the truth is, when it comes down to it, is that we actually live in the most exciting times of the Bible time. And we would say, why? Well, number one, because we have all 66 books of the Bible. We have everything, and it's so easy to access it nowadays, and we see that. And this is God's full revelation to all humans, and he will reveal himself through his word, and that's what we see happening in a sense with Jacob here, as God revealing himself once again to him. Which now brings to verses 4 through 13. Someone read that for us, please.
So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field to his flock, and said to them, I see your father's countenance, that it is not favorable toward me as before, but the God of my father has been with me. And you know that with all my might I have served your father. Yet your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times, but God did not allow him to hurt me. If he said thus, the speckled shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore speckled. And if he said thus, the streaked shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked. So God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. And it happened at the time when the flocks conceived that I lifted my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped upon the flocks were streaked, speckled, and gray spotted. Then the angel of God spoke to me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, Here I am. And he said, Lift your eyes now and see, all the rams which leap on the flocks are streaked, speckled, and gray spotted, for I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar, and where you made a vow to me. Now arise, get out of this land, and return to the land of your family.
Thank you. So as you see here, I'll just say verse 13. The reason to me verse 13 sounds like he hadn't been spoken to for these 20 years is because, remember who I am. I am the Lord, the one that spoke to you of Bethel. And the angel of God, meaning, of course, understanding this to be Jesus pre-incarnate, God, and Jesus, of course, being God also, this understanding of how important this is. But, so Jacob laid out the facts. He brought Rachel and laid it to him. He laid out all the facts, and God's divine providence. God did this. God took care of us. And first he described the tension that's between their dad and him. And obviously, this is a very unhealthy, you want to say work environment, even a family environment. I mean, it's very unhealthy what's going on here. Yet Jacob sought to preserve and honor God. This is what's so important about this. Jacob, is just saying, hey, get on the wagon, we're going. I don't care what y'all say about your dad. He's explaining things, and he's very good about it, and he wants them to know, look, this isn't my choice. Whose choice is it for us to do? God's. And we're going to follow that choice. And here says something great about about Jacob. If God hadn't spoken to Jacob until now, Jacob immediately believes and follows it. It shows us where his heart is. It shows us where his soul's right, his spirit, where he's looking in the right direction. You know, in the book of 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 18 to 23, if someone will read this, notice what it talks about here. If someone read this for us, please.
Servants, be submissive to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the harsh. For this is commendable if, because of conscience toward God, one endures grief, suffering wrongfully. For what credit is it if, when you are beaten for your faults, you take it patiently? But when you do good and suffer, if you take it patiently, this is commendable before God. For this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps, who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth, who, when he was reviled, did not receive in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously.
Thank you. When we read this, you know, you hear, you can see Jacob, you know, in what you're reading here. You can see what he's dealing with, what he's going through. You know, how many of us here have ever dealt with a difficult boss? You know, a difficult situation. You know, someone that tells you something the way they, and it's not just a one-time thing. I mean, they just don't seem to have a good attitude, you know, and treat you in a certain way. And you just deal with it, or maybe you said something, maybe you got fired, I don't know. You know, look, we see this, but God's telling us how to handle it, what to do, and he knows what the outcome would be better with that. So God would have you honor this person and seek to endure it until he brings about a change in your environment. You know, we understand here, we look at this and we go, you know, look what God was doing with Jacob. It wasn't that Jacob was doing anything wrong. It wasn't Jacob was a bad guy. God was putting him through these trials in a sense, you know, through this testing, trying to mold him into something better. And the same thing can be done today. Fortunately, despite Jacob's challenge, God proved himself faithful to Jacob. And that's the story for us. That's what we see here, that God will show him faithful to you and I. You know, Jacob was the kind of guy who follows you, you know, into the revolving door, and as he follows you in, he comes out the other side in front of you. I mean, I don't know how that happens, but that takes the case. And he wasn't, you know, owned in his own ways and, you know, brought in prosperity protection. It was all blessings of God. And it seems without a doubt that Jacob truly understands that he knows that. Which brings us to Psalm 118:6. Someone go and read that for us, please.
The Lord is on my side, I will not fear. What can man do to me?
Exactly right. And here's David writing this. You know, David dealt with a lot of problems too, didn't he? He dealt with a lot of, you know, King Saul wanted to kill him many times. And then other people wanted to do the same to him. And we see here, you know, and this is what it is. If the Lord is on my side, I'm not going to fear. I'm not going to fear who? I'm not going to fear anybody. No one. Doesn't matter who they are. And we see, now that doesn't mean someone has a gun to your head, so say, oh, go ahead and shoot. God's going to make the bullet go around my head. I mean, that's not what he's getting at here. But he's telling us, don't fear, you know, the ways of human beings. And this is what we see. So it is also worth noting that God, you know, told Jacob to go back to Bethel, back to the place where he encouraged the Lord in a personal, encountered the Lord, I guess, in a personal way. But sometimes the way forward is actually to go back. And that's what he's doing, he's going back. And we go, well, does there anywhere else in the Bible tell us that? In the New Testament? Sure does. Revelation chapter 2, verse 4 and 5. Remember here, Jesus is talking about the 7 churches here, and he's talking to each one. You know, most of them weren't doing good. You know, there are only a couple of them here. And this is what he says about repenting, about making yourself go back to the ways of what you should have been. Someone will read this for us, please.
Nevertheless, I have this against you, that you have left your first love. Remember, therefore, from where you have fallen. Repent and do the first works, or else I will come to you quickly and remove your lampstand from its place unless you repent.
Thank you. Now, I want you to think about this for a moment. Why did Jacob leave once again? Why did he leave home? Mom told him to, because why?
His brother wanted to kill him.
Esau wanted to kill him, but it was because of Jacob's sins. It was what him and his mom did in deceiving, you know, his father and deceiving Esau and everything. You know, people say, well, that's what God wanted me. No, God would have made it happen regardless, because God already said it was going to happen. And it would have. It didn't have to happen that way. But humans get involved. They want to do their own thing. Which now, it's going to continue on. Genesis 31, 14 through 16. Let's see what Rachel and Leah, how they respond to this. Maybe they're like, no. We can't leave our dad. We just can't do that. No, we don't want to do that at all. It's not what happens here. Notice they show us once again how Laban really looks, what his life is really about. Once again, worldly side, himself, all about himself. If someone want to read that for us, please.
Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there still any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? And we not considered strangers by him, for he has sold us and also completely consumed our money. For all these riches which God has taken from our father are really ours and our children's. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do it.
And those great words. I mean, what words there? You know, we see here, we find it's sad. I mean, it's really sad to see what's happening in the family here. But at the same time, knowing they understand where their alliance is. They understand where they need to be looking to. So we see Rachel and Leah agree with Jacob's assessment. The sister understands basically they have been cheated of their inheritance, and that the real inheritance would be found, here it goes, in God, with Jacob. That's what they're going to see. You know, it's interesting when you look at these things, you know, in Genesis 31, 4 through 16, 4 through 16, Jacob and his wife, you know, mention God by from 4 to 16, they actually mention God 7 times in those few verses. 7 times. Now think about that. Clearly, he is the one that is behind every sin. And we know that this may be the first time in quite a while that the sister Leah and Rachel actually agree on something. It didn't seem like they agreed on much, did they? Through their life. And a lot of that was because of what their father put them through. They can agree, though, in uniting against a common adversary, their father. Isn't that remarkable? Against Laban. And why? Well, because Laban has stolen their inheritance, treated them like, what do they say? Treated them as who? Treated them like strangers, you know, foreigners is what we see. The word is sold them and used their money from their dowry, because this is what we understand when they're mentioned the way they are. Back in those days, we know that when a child was born, especially a girl, we see it would be a girl, because the man would usually be able to take care of himself, the girl had to have a dowry. And we see that. And the way it sounds is that he used that money to do it for himself, to take care of himself. And that's just a terrible thing as we see here. So what they did, they said, we're going to follow the leadership of our husband. We're going to follow what he's saying because it makes sense. And actually, here's the difference. Even though Leah and Rachel may have felt like times they're being treated not great by Jacob, they understand that everything that's happening here is for a reason, and that all has to do with God. That's why they said, hey, if God said to do it, let's do it. Let's just get it done that way. And I love that portion there in that moment. Now, does this mean they're truly godly women already? No, it does not. Especially Rachel. We're going to learn. You know, exactly right. Rachel still wants some of what her dad, what they grew up with. And we'll see what I mean by that in just a moment. So let's go and jump to Genesis 31, 17 through 18. If someone read that, please.
And Jacob rose and set his sons and his wives on camels. And he carried away all his livestock and all his possessions which he had gained, his acquired livestock which he had gained, Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan.
Thank you. So he's taking everything, isn't he? I mean, everything. Of course, that makes perfect sense. Remember, this isn't an easy journey. Remember, it's about at least 300 miles away to where they're going to go to from Haran over to the mountains of Gilead. The journey must have been exhausting for Jacob, knowing a couple things. Here it is. Not just exhausting for the family and everything, I'm not talking about physically. I'm talking about exhausting mentally. You know, when things harm us mentally, it actually wears us down faster than physical things. And we see that when we say, well, what's going on here? Where's the exhausting part for Jacob? Number one, knowing that Laban is pursuing him from behind. He's following him. He's figured that's what's going to happen in order to kill him. Who is he afraid of is probably in the front as he gets closer to home? Esau, exactly right. So he's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place here. And this is where it's at. He doesn't say, hey God, can you check and see if Esau's there? I don't want him to be there. What does he do? He just does what God tells him to do. He goes. And it reminds us a lot of his grandfather Abraham, doesn't it? I mean, we see that in resemblance here and how great it is that we find this in the two of them. All right, so let's move on. 19 through 21, Genesis 31. Someone read that for us, please.
Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the household idols that were her father's. And Jacob stole away, unknown to Laban the Syrian, did not tell him that he intended to flee. So he fled with all that he had. He arose and crossed the river and headed toward the mountains of Gilead.
Thank you. So, we're told that Rachel stills Laban's household idols. While Laban was busy, working in the fields with his sheep, or however you want to look at that, these idols are called teraphims. They were basically small little figurines. We see 2 to 3 inches tall, basically. And then we talked about already, they were used in divination, as we understand, they would bring good luck. Remember, as I told you, when we read earlier, when we see here that Laban, basically congratulated Jacob and talking about, your God, what he has done. He's done this for you. Really, when you look at the Hebrew word there, he's really not looking at Jacob's God. The word divination, I can't get it right. Divination is actually used in there, basically showing that he's actually talking about idol worship, is what he's getting at, some other God. In other words, Laban's saying, I don't know who your God is, he's just a God like any other God. And that's kind of what happened there. And so, think about the girls. The girls were raised this way. They had to be. They've been raised on this and what we see and understand. Or else Rachel, if they didn't, Rachel wouldn't have what? She would have stolen. She wouldn't have known anything about them at all. It's just, no, I just want something to remind me of my dad. That's not what this is, nothing whatsoever. So the question is, why did Rachel take the idols? There's several possibilities, of course. Some believe, because what they believe these little idols could do is give them fertility, and that may be what it was. She was guaranteeing fertility to have more children, because she already said that, and even though she said, God's going to, we're going to see God bless me with Joseph, God's going to bless me with what? One more, and we see this here, and we know that, and so it may have been for that, but for divination, the protection during the journey to Canaan, possibly prevent Laban from using them to catch them. She may have thought that, chapter 30, 27, the way they reacted with them. Or maybe in order to establish a future on Laban's family inheritance. Well, we cannot be sure. Here it is. We cannot be sure of the exact reason, but it seems likely that Rachel simply took them for her own protection and blessing. That is not good. That is not good, because she's looking at these idols that they're like little gods that can do something for her. And she doesn't need to be looking at these little idols for that, because they're doing nothing. If that was the case, they were Laban's idols, why would those gods, little gods, allow themselves to be taken to Rachel? So, it's very simple to see this. This is confirmed, of course, chapter 35, verse 2, where we find that Jacob commanded, he's going to command in chapter 35, God is going to command Jacob, get rid of these foreign gods. Get rid of them out of your house. Get rid of them where they're at. So it seems more than likely that Rachel may have well been attached religiously to the ways of her dad and to the ways of this pagan worship, and which is really terrible, because that can really cause a problem. But it doesn't just cause a little problem. If she's this attached to it, we don't know what she's been teaching her rest of her family, Joseph and many others we see there, and understand these things that would happen. Go ahead, David.
Some people today may not admit it, but still follow the same kind of traditions where they have like a good luck charm, or they rely on something. I think about astrology, for example. A lot of people look, what is my sign? And that's going to tell me how things are going to go. If I'm a Scorpio or whatever, you're looking to the stars, and you're looking for that instead of the one who created the stars, the one who made those things. And that's really what she's doing, or possibly anyway.
Right.
She's looking to those idols for, this is how I'm going to know what to do, or I'm going to look to them to guide me. Instead of God.
And I think we do things like this sometimes not even knowing it, not even realizing. How many here have ever spent hours in a clover field looking for a 4-leaf clover? Anybody ever done that? I've done it. My uncle, who was an elder in church, his whole front yard, that's all it was clovers. And me and my cousins, we spent hours there just looking for a 4-leaf clover. Why? Why do we want the 4-leaf clover? Because we're told it'll bring good luck. That's exactly right. We see that, and that's one of those things which we really don't think about. Not saying we're pagan worshiper in that sense or anything, but it's the things we look at. God doesn't bring just luck. God brings blessings, and there's the difference of what we see here, and appreciate that statement. It's curious, Rachel, and not Leah, almost always turned out to be Jacob's greatest hindrance in his life. It really does. When we see the one he truly loved more of all of them. And in spite of the fact that Rachel had a growing trust in God, she was reluctant to basically, I guess you say, complete that break with these little idols, with the things that were past that we see here. So Jacob left without informing Laban, of course. We also need to get that. Jacob was doing, of course, what God told him to do. Laban's words mean nothing when it comes to God's words. God's words always supersede man's words, and that's what we see here. So as we look at this, what's going to happen? Well, it makes perfect sense. Laban's going to pursue Jacob. He's going to go after him. But what's terrible about this is Laban knows whose animals those are, but Laban's after something else, isn't he? What is Laban actually chasing?
The idols.
The idols, exactly right. Not his granddaughter, not his grandchildren, not his daughters, not Jacob, not his, his livestock that he would say his, but now his sons believe they're chasing what? The livestock, their inheritance, saying that he took them, that he stole them, as we see here. So let's go ahead and jump into this. Our story continues with the confrontation between Laban and Jacob, and we're going to look at 22-24. But it's interesting, before we can get through this, someone's going to talk to Laban. Someone that Laban would not expect to talk to him. And it's interesting because he listens to it to a point, I guess you say. So someone go and read Genesis 31, 22-24, please.
And Laban was told on the third day that Jacob had fled. Then he took his brethren with him and pursued him for 7 days' journey. And he overtook him in the mountains of Gilead. But God had come to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night and said to him, "Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad."
Thank you. Isn't it interesting to see that God's talking to a man that's not a godly man, I mean, as in God, but this is nothing new for God. We're going to see God do that with Nebuchadnezzar. We're going to see God do that with many other leaders. We see, as we see that, basically those really who took, Israel into captivity, and we see this happen. So God himself appears to Laban in a dream. Here's a wicked unbeliever, really is the best way to look at him, and provide him counsel and direction. Indeed, we find here that God is a gracious, sovereign God. The providence of God, and we know God provides for everybody in the world, but there are ways of providence that he provides only blessings for Christians. We would see where back then, of course, those who were following the look to God. Which brings us to 25 through 30. If someone go and read this, please, we see this tension. Remember, they're there 7 days, they got there, and now they're ready. And that's really quick. I mean, they got there really fast. Because remember, they have a 10-day, they left 3 days before that, so they have a 10-day head start. So Laban and them are pursuing them like beasts. I mean, really, really tough to get to them. So someone go and read this for us, please.
So Laban overtook Jacob. And now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mountains. And Laban with his brethren and reached in the mountain of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done? You have stolen away unknown to me and carried away my daughter's right captive, taken with the sword. Why did thee flee away secretly and steal away from me, and not tell me, for I might have sent you away with joy, song, and with cymbal and harp?"
Imagine this right here. I mean, it's just, you read that, you can't read it without smiling, like, are you kidding me? Yeah. And Jacob's probably there going, oh yeah, sure it is, right, yeah. Oh, number one, yeah, it's about your daughter. I don't think so. And number two, yeah, you really give me a part, whatever. So let's go ahead and keep reading, Greg.
"And you did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Now you have done foolishly in so doing. It is my power to do you harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good or bad. And now you have surely gone because you greatly long for your father's house, but you steal my goods, God."
Oh, there, now we get to the answer. There we get to the reason. So check this out. Laban plays the part of an offended father and grandfather. When he says sons, he's talking about grandsons that we see here, whose deep affection for his daughter and grandson caused him great emotional pain, is what he's basically saying. And when he found out that they secretly left and he didn't get to say goodbye, he's like, this just isn't right. So he overplays his hand. And by saying, and this is where he overplayed his hand. When he said, I would have basically thrown you a huge party. Jacob's like, this is all a lie. This is all a lie. This is crazy here in season. Of course, we said the big issue with Laban is, why did you steal my gods? Now, what is Jacob probably thinking right now?
I don't know.
I don't know what you're talking about. He still doesn't know. Even when he's searching for it, he's like, what are you talking about? Never believes that they happen. I mean, we see this here. So this is important for us to understand. It shows us that Rachel did not share this with Jacob. And it shows us because she knows more than likely Jacob would have been like, what?
Yeah.
No, I don't want those in. No, that's going to bring possible problems. Because remember, think about how many times throughout the Bible we see that someone brought something into a household or into the camp they shouldn't have. And what did God do? What does God do? Destroys them. I mean, if not, or if something happens. Yeah, exactly right. So it's going to move on to 31 through 35. Let me go ahead and read these. I only have 4 minutes left. I think I got 3 minutes left. All right. Then Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid. Now he's answering why he left. Because I was afraid, for I said, perhaps you would take your daughters from me by force. So he's basically playing into what he's saying. He says, with whomever you find your gods, do not let him live. Oh, did you catch that? Did you catch that? Whomever you find your gods with, do not let them what? Live. You think he would have said that if he knew that Rachel had it? No way whatsoever. So in the presence of our brethren, identify what I have of yours and take it with you. So Jacob's like, there's no way, we don't have any of this. And for Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. And Laban went into Jacob's tent, into Leah's tent, and into the two maids' tent, but did not find them. Then he went out of Leah's tent and entered into Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household idols, put them in the camel's saddle, and sat on them. And Laban searched all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, let it not displease my lord, that I cannot rise before you, for the man or woman is with me. And he searched, but did not find the household idols. So after the search comes up empty, all this happening, you think it'd be like, okay, I'm going to leave. Guess what Jacob finally does? He's never really talked back to Laban. He's never really, I'm a man too, in this dream. He finally unleashes 20 years of pain, 20 years of suffering in a sense. And this is what he says. Then Jacob was angry and rebuked Laban. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, what is my trespass? What is my sin that you have so hotly pursued me? Although you have searched all my things, what part of your household things have you found? Set it there before, and I want you to catch it. That's very important. Because he believes, Laban, if you look back then, they think a daughter or children are considered, part of their household, property in the sense of what's there. And he's saying, they're married to me. They aren't yours anymore. And we see that. So we go on to say, set it here before my brethren and your brethren, that they may judge between us both. So he said, let's put it all out in the open. I mean, look at this here. And these 20 years I've been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried your young. And I have not eaten the rams of your flock. That which was torn by the beasts, I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it. And you require, so what happens here, what we mean by that, is back in those days, if something happened to a sheep, a lamb, or anything that the shepherd was watching, he could actually bring that back to the owner, and the owner wouldn't hold him liable for it, would release him. Look what Jacob says. He didn't even do that. He just automatically did what? Replaced them. Automatically replaced them. He goes on to say, there I was in the day, drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sheep departed from my eyes. Thus I have been in your house 20 years. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages. Look at that again. 10 times. 10 times. I mean, in other words, you went against your word, what you said 10 different times. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac have been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and my labor of my hands and rebuked you last night. Look at that. He says when God talked to you, it wasn't just be careful. He's saying God told you what you better not do. It was rebuking when it really came down to it. It's kind of reminiscent. We think back to 1 Peter 2:12 as we think about these things. Here, I don't have time to read all that. I'll just read real quick. Live such good lives, and though they accuse you of doing, that's a cool slide, that's hard to read, doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. And so it all has to do with glorifying God. Jacob defended his character, and he did it very well. And I just love seeing that he finally actually stood up for himself and did what he needed to do. Jacob was a model worker, basically, a model son-in-law that somebody would want to find that. And I'm out of time, I'm not going to go on. I would say go read this yourself. Laban's covenant with Jacob. Basically what happens, they set up a pillar, they set up these big stones in the mountains there, and he said sets up kind of a boundary. You don't pass this way, and I won't pass this way. So we're staying in your own area, and I'll just show you this before we close, give you an idea of where we were at. This is where he came down from up here, and this is where you see Sukkoth, you see that very well. Just give you an idea of our area, Bethel, Jericho, and Jerusalem. You're going to see, of course, that of Jebus, right as before Jerusalem. And here's where it is on the map. There's Mizpah, because this is what they ended up calling the place where they were at, the mountains. And you can see the mountain range there. There are Mizpah, and there's Mizpah where you can see the difference of Jebus, which will be Jerusalem, in their standing. And this is what Mizpah looks like today. And this is the tell that is there. It is up on the mountain, this whole area right here, and they believe this is where it took place. There's no pillar, nothing there that they found that's been gone. I'm sure over the years, rocks taken away. So there we go. Any questions or comments before we close? That was really quick. Doug, go ahead.
When Abraham's family, when they left Ur and went to Hebron or wherever it was that they went to start out with, and then God spoke to Abraham. Abraham was the only one that God spoke to, because the rest of his family still stayed worshiping idols. I mean, and this with Laban actually shows that, because and even Isaac, God didn't talk to Isaac like he did to Abraham or Jacob,
Right.
Because
Exactly.
he almost skipped through Isaac and used him as as Jacob's father.
Yep.
And so the whole thing through there, God has picked out exactly who He wanted, everything to come through.
Yes. And then, remember, and God doesn't tell these people to treat him like a robot, you got to do this. Isaac had opportunities to do things right by God, but he just chose not to. And so Jacob is a great example. Jacob didn't either in the beginning. Here's the difference. Jacob allowed himself to be changed. He allowed himself to be changed for the better and for God. And that's what we see. And I appreciate the comment and everybody else's. And one there. Thanks a lot.
Tuesday through Saturday, supposed to be helping the guy who does the Walmart, and he has some grocery stores. Him and probably somebody else. That'll be nice. I'll lose my day. We have 3 days. Works out pretty
We're going to have to make this other side.